Hi, Don.
Hello, is that Lynn? Is that Lynn Gugi?
Yes, it is. How are you?
We are fine. We wish we could say the same about our colleagues on the ground in Zambia, but
I
hopefully in
know
a minute or so they'll be able to tell us what
exactly
exactly is going on and so on.
and
But
what
I'm
we can
quite
do.
grateful to see colleagues have joined from Nairobi, from New York, from a number of other places.
Yes, we're facing the same predicament, so it would be good to think together what we can do.
Yes, indeed.
Hmm.
So I see that it's 10 minutes past the hour. I think other colleagues will join when they join, but want to be respectful of the time of the colleagues who joined on time and who are here and so on. My name is Donald Dare. I'm Chief Executive of the Pan-African Lawyers Union and associated also with a number of civic and civil society initiatives across the continent and globally. Pan-African Lawyers Union is merely the Zoom host. We are providing a platform for our colleagues from Zambia to be able to talk with Pan-African citizen colleagues from across the continent, and also to be able to address colleagues from the media who may join us so that they can give us an update of what is going on the ground. And we, on the other hand, can express our solidarity and see if there are practical things that we could do to assist in this short time. So I would request for those on the call, to the extent that you can, please, you can just rate your name and how you'd like us to describe or ascribe you, which institution, which country, which initiative you come from in the chat. But meanwhile, I will be handing over in a minute to my colleague Linda Kasonde, former president of the Law Association of Zambia, but also founder of the LCK Freedom Foundation, which is one of the prominent civil society organizations that are active in Zambia. And I'll just start with that because she's personally known to me. But then Linda and her colleagues will take over, and they'll let us know how they've arranged themselves to talk with colleagues. And we listen to them. And I hope that at the end, there can be an interactive discussion, which again, they can moderate, and you can only assist to the extent wanted. So to the my colleague Linda Kasonde, I would say please take over, and you'll introduce your colleagues to us and tell us how you'd like to take this. Thank you.
Hello and good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's a really critical time for Zambia. As many of you know, Zambia has been a peaceful country, and we reintroduced multi-party democracy in 1991. And since then, we've had several peaceful transfers of power. So what we are currently experiencing in our current election period is totally unprecedented. We really are on the precipice of losing our democracy. I just want to introduce, actually can't see them, our colleagues who are supposed to speak on this panel. There's Dr. Sishua, who is a Zambian historian, well known to some of you, who I think it's fair to say predicted much of what is happening now, much to our chagrin. I don't see Mrs. Beauty Katebe there. Is Miss Fides Temba there? Okay. So I think what we'll do, a good place to start would be with the background, the history of how we've arrived at where we're at now. So I will hand over to Dr. Sishua to set the scene for us as to what has been happening in the last 5 years in Zambia as we've led up to this August 2026 general election. and then we'll get into discussing what is happening currently in the country as we wait for the final election results to be announced. Dr. Sishua, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope that I'm clear. Thank you so much, Madam Kasonde. I was hoping that you didn't put me on the spot by starting so that I don't make the mistakes that others can learn from. In terms of the understanding how we got here, I think it's important to frame this in the context of Zambia within Southern Africa, maybe even Africa in general. Unlike many countries in the region, Zambia has had a very established democratic tradition, which has been noted as a model for other countries, and that history has rested on the presence of a number of factors. One has been the existence of a set of institutions that have been very crucial to coming together to defend democracy whenever democracy is under attack. Civil society initially, grouped around church organizations, were joined by non-governmental organizations, NGOs, in the 1990s, following the country's transition to multi-party democracy. And those, even though the character of the civil society changed in the context of neoliberalism, where the kind of mass organizations that characterized civic organizations in the 1970s and 80s, that is, religious organizations, trade union movement, weakened. What really helped was the emergence of these new associations whose existence benefited from the presence of a liberal constitution that secured their rights. And that was also aided to an extent by the emergence of a private media that thrived over the course of the next few decades and providing platform to new opposition parties that emerged following the transition to multi-party rule. That there were also other institutions like the Electoral Commission of Zambia, because until 1996, the country didn't have an independent professional electoral commission. It was constituted as and when the elections, normally headed by a Deputy Chief Justice. But in the 1990s, it was felt that it was important to create such a body. And what was also important was the legislation that established the commission. It was stated very clearly that the commission should always be led by a judge or a former judge at superior court level, that is High Court or Supreme Court, and that in the instance that you didn't have such a person, and the person who leads the commission should be somebody who qualifies to hold judicial office at that senior level. And since the establishment of the commission, the tradition has been that presidents used their prerogative to appoint either sitting judges or former judges all the way until 2021, the election. And then you also had the existence of strong opposition parties that were able to mobilize support, hold peaceful assemblies. And that tradition, was also aided by the presence of, a deep politicized military. Zambia didn't have the history of neighboring countries such as Zimbabwe, Namibia, or Angola, where the liberation movement had a liberation army, which, following the achievement of independence, transitioned to become the guarantor of state power for that liberation movement. In the case of Zambia, independence was won by the pen rather than the gun, and that really aided the fact that the military was able to be kept away from politics. Soldiers themselves began to believe, or rather came to embrace, the ballot as an important mechanism of changing governments. And so democracy was strengthened by really a constellation of these factors. And that remained the case until, I think, 2011, when Zambia experienced its second transition. The election of Michael Sata and his party, the Patriotic Front, began to build or plant some of the seeds that were to germinate over the course of that decade. Opposition parties such as the former ruling party that Sata defeated, the movement for multi-party democracy, that had been in power since 1991, found themselves deregistered through the abuse of state institutions, such as the registrar of societies in Zambia. Political parties until 2016 were governed by a department under the Ministry of Home Affairs called the Registrar of Societies. That was problematic because usually this ministry is led by politicians, or they use this kind of institutions to undermine their political competitors in the opposition. But then we had the relatively, independent judges who could curtail some of the executive overreach, and so the decision to suspend and that rather to deregister the MMD was quashed by the High Court. And the Sata didn't live long. He was ailing by the time he won power. He was in advanced age, so he died in office in 2014 and was succeeded by Edgar Lungu, who was to govern the country until 2021. It was really under the rule of Edgar Lungu where we saw democracy eroding on a serious scale. Lungu shut down the Post newspaper, which was the country's leading private daily, established in 1991 as part of the liberalization of the media landscape. Lungu also shut down the main private television network called Prime TV. In both cases, the argument was legal. Like, in the case of the Post, they said they owed the state some outstanding taxes, and they used that excuse to say the newspaper had failed to settle its debt, and therefore the state was shutting it down. The newspaper, of course, disputed that those claims by the state, and they said, we have not failed to pay. We are just disputing this. Can we reconcile the figures? But that wasn't done, and the Post was shut down, which was a very, very sad development, given that the Post newspaper was very important even to the strength of civil society. Then the Prime TV was shut down on the basis that their license had expired. They forgot to renew it before 6 months as required by law. And they appealed the Minister of Information at the time, Dorasilia, were unsuccessful. So what you saw was what we characterize as lawfare, the use of legal mechanisms to undermine democracy. In a strict sense, what the government was doing was not, illegal. They had the authority, for example, to take the decision they did. But what we see here is an abuse of the law. And then you had the civil society also increasingly coming under attack from political elites in power. Some of Zambia's foremost civic activists, such as Laura Miti, Linda Kasonde herself was leading the Law Association of Zambia, came under increased attacks from members of the ruling party. Laura Miti and her colleagues in civil society were constantly arrested for protesting against government excesses such as corruption. Linda Kasonde, who did more than most of us to provide direction when she was leading the Law Association of Zambia, showing courage, inspiring courage as well as example, was attacked on multiple levels. And at one time, the Law Association itself was threatened with the multiplicity, like the government supporters threatened to create other statutory entities that would have really fragmented the lawyers. And then opposition parties also came under severe, attack. Hakainde Hichilema, the current president, was arrested in 2017 on what many people saw as a traffic violation for failure to give away the presidential motorcade. But that incident was that innocuous, incident was turned into a very serious offense of treason. The state claimed that he was seeking to topple the president, and they arrested him and kept him in detention for about 4 months before domestic and international pressure forced the government to release him. Parliament also saw significant attacks. MPs of the main opposition party, over 40 of them at one time, were suspended. The executive then also created a set of institutions such as the Constitutional Court, to which the president appointed the people who were seen generally as lacking the required competence and qualification to serve on the court, but were seen as allies of the president. So what we see over the course of the 2010s was an executive that undermined the guardrails of democracy, civil society, opposition, parliament, and it was partly in response to this closing democratic space that the current president of the opposition positioned himself on the reformist ticket to say, if elected, he was going to strengthen democracy in addition to repairing the economy, because Lungu and the Patriotic Front were very keen to embark on a poorly managed, nationalization of the mining industries that created even economic difficulties. That's how the 2021 election happened. And despite the restrictions imposed by the COVID pandemic, as well as the ways in which the state itself limited rights, there was a peaceful transition. Edgar Lungu initially resisted to concede because of pressure from within the governing party that felt that they could do something about it. But in the end, following the intervention of a number of key leaders such as the AU and the SADC election observation mission leaders, by Koroma, the former president of Sierra Leone, and the Jakaya Kikwete, former president of Tanzania, as well as former president of Zambia, Rupiah Banda, Lungu conceded peacefully, and there was a smooth transition. The next 5 years were, many Zambians expected that the 2010s would be a thing of the past, that democracy would thrive. But what we saw was something different. Initially, there was a window of opportunity that the president took advantage of to repeal a section of repressive law that was in the Penal Code, which his predecessors had used to undermine free speech, called the Defamation of the President law. And many of us got excited thinking that was just the beginning, but it turned out to be the end, in the sense that what happened over the course of the following years were three broader developments that I think undermined democracy. The first was the creation of new legislation that the current president had actually opposed when he was in opposition. So Lungu, before he left office, passed a very repressive cybersecurity law that human rights activists argued undermined democracy. But the president in opposition said that would be the first law that he repeals if elected. He was elected, but rather than repealing it, he actually created two statutes out of it, both of them containing new provisions that actually were more repressive than the original law. So what we saw was reform without change. And he dusted off his administration, that he dusted off colonial era legislation, particularly the law to do with sedition, to arrest so many people whose offense, I think, could qualify to be part of robust political debate. It almost became an offense to criticize the authorities, even when you're in opposition. So what we saw were the arrest of both ordinary citizens and political actors as a result of the resuscitation of these laws. And then we had the opposition parties deny the right to peaceful assembly, unlike in the PF era, where you could have this kind of this right enjoyed perhaps sparingly. In the context of the last 5 years, opposition parties were totally denied the exercise of this right. by the authorities on two grounds. One was that the government didn't have sufficient policemen and women to manage these assemblies, and that there were security concerns that were never identified. So over the course of the 5 years, it was very difficult for citizens to associate themselves because the right to peaceful assembly has within it, I think, two other rights: the right to free speech, because people meet to talk, but it also has the right of association undermined, because people who meet to talk are usually those who support the same party. And that provided some of the seeds that we see Amnesty International, providing their latest report on Zambia, which was released on I think on 10th August, where they show that there was over the last 5 years a degree of authoritarian tendencies by the current administration, which was disappointing to the government that was elected on a ticket of reform. Then we also see undermining other institutions. The most notable one was the Electoral Commission of Zambia, where for the first time since the body was established, we see the president appointing somebody who has never been a judge. And that's not to say that she doesn't qualify to hold the role. Mangala Zarumis was appointed, qualified to hold the job of chairperson because she had the requisite legal experience. The reason why previous presidents gravitated towards appointing serving judges was because judges are seen as impartial or apolitical. We don't know which party they support. The nature of their job requires them to be above politics. And the people then tend to retain a degree of trust in those kind of elites. So that was a first departure that alarmed many people. But the president didn't end there. He appointed two other commissioners, both of whom had the links to the current party in power. The most recent one was appointed actually on the eve of nominations in May this year. The president plucked that person away from their campaign onto the commission. Again, criticism from the opposition and civil society didn't deter this appointment, which simply required a simple majority to confirm in the National Assembly. So they all passed. So going to the election, what you had was an electoral commission that was not seen as impartial. It's normal for political elites to be a little bit suspicious of electoral commission, but what we had this time was a blatantly clear example of an incumbent who used institutional prerogatives to advance partisan agendas. And then the other final point I think that I should mention before we go further was the way in which civic voices were undermined. Many of the critical voices that spoke out against the Lungu era excesses were appointed to key government bodies, or some of them in the diplomatic service. Now that's a good thing in one sense, because you want the best of us to be given the chance to implement some of the ideas that they have when in civil society. But the scale of his appointment was such that they really deprived civil society of some of the most experienced voices that were required, because they couldn't criticize the same government that they were part of. So what you saw there was not simply a president who was willing to hunt for talent, perhaps under the belief that talent is not randomly distributed, you have got to search for it, but one who was strategically undermining an important alternative source of authority by getting the best of such people and putting them in key position. For others, just self-censorship, because many of the critical academics who were outspoken in the previous era suddenly withdrew, even when some of the excesses that happened under the Lungu era reappeared under the last 5 years. And going into the election, these concerns resulted into a situation where the opposition didn't really have a flag bearer going into the election, because the main opposition party was undermined from within by the state. They couldn't even field candidates in the end in this election. So what you had was an opposition leader who emerged by default. The opposition to the HLM administration, I think, cohered around specific policy failures, particularly in relation to anti-corruption, national unity, democracy itself, as I said, aspect of the cost of living was very, very important in key areas. What was missing all along, I think, was the vehicle of expressing that opposition. And when the state tried to cripple opposition, Mondovile Brian, who was the main, who emerged as the main rival, found himself standing on a smaller, relatively, unknown political organization, and Zambia'S rallied behind this person. The ruling party was surprised by the scale of the rallies that he was able to draw, but in the end, he, despite the initial attempts to try to undermine his nomination, he ended up on the ballot. And I should end by talking about the obstacles that emerged in the context of the campaigns. We could talk about the other candidates. I think I want to focus on this one because it's very important to understanding how he got here. After he was confirmed as the main nomination, the main opposition candidate, the Electoral Commission did something strange. They produced a campaign schedule that excluded the president on the basis that he's the head of state and therefore he could go to any part of Zambia anytime he wanted. That was problematic because it effectively placed the incumbent president over and above the law, essentially, failing to distinguish between his role as the head of state as well as his partisan role as the presidential candidate for the ruling party. It allowed him to use state resources for what essentially were government activities, rather partisan activities. But that was just the beginning. The next thing was the government grabbed the passport for the opposition leader. He couldn't get out of the country to mobilize support, and in the end, he had to rely on crowdfunding, on GoFundMe to raise some capital because the local businessmen who supported him were identified for victimization. Then the media, ideally we should provide a level playing field. The state media that is never covered the opposition; they simply covered the party in power. These were concerns that I think the current president, when he was in opposition, highlighted as thing that he would change given a chance. But that didn't happen. The opposition were missing public media, but the government also crowded out of the opposition in the private media through advertising. So there wasn't a level playing field in terms of media coverage. There were reports of violence, violent activities targeted at opposition. Ruling party cadres attacked the opposition in several places, but none of them were apprehended. In some cases, the police themselves participated in these attacks by stopping abruptly campaign rallies that were, including those that were lawfully convened. And finally, the Electoral Commission itself, I think, failed to exercise a degree of control over the campaign period, particularly in relation to the activities of the government, of the governing party. So what we saw going to the election before we got into that was a political environment characterized by shrinking democratic space, one where the rights of association, of assembly, of free speech were severely undermined. Citizens lived in this environment characterized by a climate of fear, and but people were still hopeful that we can change everything through the ballot until the last few weeks, another few days that have happened, which I'm sure we are going to discuss. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sishiwa. I knew you'd be able to pull it off. So we're very grateful that you've set the scene in terms of where we're at now. So basically, it's a history of a decline of democracy, a shrinking of the civic space, and a suppression of any opposition in the run-up to this election. So I think we'll move on to where we're at now today. Our election was held on Thursday, 13th August. And I think by most accounts, everyone would agree that it was peacefully held. The actual polling day was peacefully held. We had actually anticipated an internet shutdown. That did not happen. But the subsequent events have been extremely troubling. And I'll now hand over to Fides Temba to explain what has been happening since polling day. She's also been at the headquarters of the Electoral Commission Announcement Center. So she's also monitoring there. So Fides, if you could just bring us up to speed as to where we're at now.
Thank you so much, Linda, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sishiwa. It was great listening to you. Sorry, we are in a space where there's a bit of noise. We are at the National Totaling Center here at Mulungushi International Conference Center. So like everyone else has said, that we went to the poll on the 13th of August, 2026, and the day was very peaceful. And I immediately after for the election day, I think we noticed a bit of strange happenings, contrary to the laws of Zambia. First is the closure of the polling stations. In particular, in some polling stations were closed at the right time, but then I think there were some instructions that were given to reopen the polling, and then other people were allowed to vote, which was contrary to the laws of Zambia. Then we also had situations where I think election materials, most of them were not distributed on time, like the sealing of envelopes. The counting was also delayed at the polling center where we were with Annie. I mean, according to the laws of Zambia, immediately you close, you're supposed to start counting. In some polling stations, they had to wait for a number of hours because they never had trays, they never had envelopes to seal, the ballot papers. Getting into the night, we then just had disturbances of how some polling agents were chased from the polling stations, and also counting was delayed, how some ballot boxes were stolen, some were dumped in drainages, some were burned. Then we had situations where there was violence, media intimidation. Then one of the polling, I think, monitors was actually killed. And then I think thereafter there was a bit of noise, and then we had ECZ suspend, which is very unlikely because then there were sporadic cases of violence. We did not understand why they had to suspend the counting of votes. Then I think after a number of civil society actors, the Observer Mission, International Observer Mission, I think then they had to lift, and Law Association of Zambia issued a statement because there was no legal basis for the suspension of the counting. Then the suspension was lifted immediately after 6 hours. Our concern is that what happened between the time that the suspension was done? Nobody can account for that time because most of the polling stations, polling monitors, polling agents were chased away from the stations. The polling stations were manned by law enforcement officers. Up to now, nobody has given us a statement to what truly transpired within that 5-6 hours. Okay. And then now we have, I think, in different constituencies, we've seen delayed announcement of results, unprecedented delayed. And then we've also seen in confirmed reports also videos going around of how some presiding officers were not even able to read the correct citation of. So we're also asking, where were these usually I think the practice has been where in schools it's been like school of government officials that have been mandated to do that. The exercise of recruitment of presiding officers leaves much to be desired, honestly speaking, because we had situations where presiding officers were not even able to mention their name and cite, the actual, citations for them to be able to either open or close the polling station. That is a serious concern. Thereafter, I think it's also where we had some videos showing where people were found in bushes, with ballot boxes and all. And then the intimidation of the media, the continued abduction of different prominent political actors. And I think that has been a very serious concern for us. But also we have noticed in this particular election where we have security wings that provide security, and this is usually the Zambia Police Service. But in this election, we have seen the army. We're wondering what is it? Because even the day that there were sporadic violence cases within town, we then discovered that it was actually the army that was patrolling most of the streets of Lusaka. Then there were, I think, cases where the main opposition political actors were attacked. I think one of them was the aspiring candidate for Kabwata. His residence was burnt and his patrolling center was burnt. We are running a situation room the day of elections, and when we were totaling, it was put down. And so I think all these, I think we have seen, and we do experience some of these intimidations, I think, from the time that we got independence. But this particular election, there's been huge number of irregularities, and this.
Fidus, you're on mute. Fidus, you're on mute.
Hello?
We can hear you now.
Okay, so I think this is all emanating from the point where we had to amend the Electoral Act prior to having elections, I think months before elections. And I think civil society actors and all the actors did not have enough time to go through, like what is it that has been amended, the clauses, and what does it mean? And I think we saw that at play the day that, the counting was suspended. And so for us, we need to get back to the amendment of that act. But also, I think we need to be, after the elections, I think going forward, we need to begin to interrogate some of these legal frameworks because they are a threat to our democracy. Just the happenings of this election, the slow coming in of, right now, we have 226 constituencies, yeah? And we voted on the 13th of August. Presidential elections results, we are only 105 constituencies have been announced so far. That we're remaining with 121 constituencies to be announced. We took 3 days to announce the compilation of 105 constituencies. We're thinking, will we be able to announce the results between 121 remaining constituencies between now and the 17th of August, when we were promised that they will be able to declare a winner? So for us, I think, and also the other thing, Linda, that is happening, and key stakeholders are complaining, is I think in 2021, we had a situation where I think all key stakeholders would get together, verify the results, and ensure that they are the correct results coming from the different constituencies before the announcement of the results. But also an enabling environment where even after the announcements are done, key stakeholders are given an opportunity just to ask questions. It's like we're just there to listen, and somebody's giving instructions. There's no consultation. There's no discussion. And I think that's really an unfair, and it's not an enabling environment, because we are key stakeholders. So why are we here? If they're calling us key stakeholders, why are we not having, a part in terms of verifying the results? So who's verifying these results? So we feel like in the absence of transparency and accountability of these results, because we sent monitors in these constituencies, in these wards, and therefore we also have our own parallel tallying of the results. We just want to make sure whether what is being transmitted now is the correct result of what is there at constituency level. So that opportunity is not being given by the Electoral Commission of Zambia, and it's actually bringing a lot of doubt and a lot of, I think we are doubting the credibility of these results, because there's no enabling environment for all of us to sit and agree and discuss and verify and agree Yeah, just like the monitors are agreeing at constituency level, I think also that should have been extended to all of us. So basically, this is what is happening currently. We are waiting for another set of results to be announced in about 11 minutes from now, hoping that they will be able to stick to time. We've also experienced, I think, a situation where they are not respecting, the time, because they would announce, they would tell you, no, we'll be meeting at such a time. It's taking them 2 hours to come back without any apology or anything before they could announce results. So people are waiting anxiously, and then the communication is also very poor, I would say. So yeah, I think this is what we are experiencing here at the National Totaling Center. But the same experience here is the experience that most of our monitors at constituency level are experiencing, because some of them are still waiting. They have not even had an opportunity to step out because of just some of the things that are happening. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you so much, Fides. That was a great run through of what's happening at the moment. I will just add on to some of the things that Fides has said. So sure, I don't think you touched on Bill 7, did you? Are you there?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So in terms of the background to this election, what we saw was a manipulation of the constitutional and legal framework around elections to favor the incumbent. So in 2025, the government presented a bill before the National Assembly called the Constitution Amendment Bill number 7 of 2025. And essentially, those amendments were designed to give an inbuilt majority to whoever wins the presidential election, by firstly adding what they called proportional representation seats, which are tied to whoever wins the presidential election, and also increasing the number of seats, which was tied to the delimitation process that took place last year. So under our constitution, the constitution mandates that the constituencies should be reviewed every 10 years. And so this delimitation process was conducted. It was not transparent. It was not open. And the result was that the political strongholds of the incumbent have had a greater weight in terms of their votes compared to larger centers of voters such as Lusaka and the Copperbelt, which are traditionally the areas where the deciding vote happens, I would say. I hope that's a fair thing to say. So we've seen the weakening of the vote in those areas, Lusaka and the Copperbelt, and a strengthening in the strongholds of the incumbent. And then on top of that, the proportional representation seats, which favor whoever wins the presidential election. Then the Electoral Process Act was introduced just before the election, as I think it was Fides who mentioned. And amongst the provisions in that act, in terms of nominations for seats, the Secretary General and one other official of the party have to approve who ultimately gets adopted. And this became a problem because the former ruling party, the Patriotic Front, was essentially infiltrated by an affiliate of the ruling party. And basically the party was taken over by that affiliate, and the true members of the party were pushed out to the fringes. And so the whole party disintegrated and were somewhat in disarray. There was no real organized opposition for most of the time that the incumbent has been in office. and by design, as I mentioned. And also, the former president, Edgar Lungu, tried to rally the party, but ultimately he died over a year ago, which of course further confusion in the party. And it's only recently that the opposition have kind of coalesced around what is called the Tonse Pamosi Alliance. And from that alliance emerged the leading opposition political party, the NRPUP. Don't ask me to spell out the acronym at the moment. So the head of the NRP, the presidential candidate, was Brian Mundubile, with his running mate, Makebi Zulu, both of whom are lawyers and former provincial ministers in the previous government. So they haven't exactly come from nowhere, but it's been quite interesting to see how quickly they've managed to mobilize support. And I think that's mainly due to the fact that the two main election issues in this particular election are the high cost of living and also high unemployment rates. So I'm sure you've heard wonderful stories about how well Zambia is doing at a macroeconomic level, but this has not translated into better living standards for ordinary Zambians. For example, at the time that the ruling UPND party took office in 2021, the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection does a needs assessment basket for a family of 5. And they estimated that around August 2021, a food basket for a family of 5 cost 8,400 kwacha. And currently, that needs basket for a family of 5 costs 12,100 kwacha. And just to give put that into context, the average income of a Zambian family, average between the rural income and the urban income, is around 3,000 or just over 3,000 kwacha. So people are struggling to make ends meet. And this has been the hot issue in this election and may explain why Mr. Mundubile has been able to emerge seemingly from nowhere. So the other thing I wanted to mention regarding the suspension of the tallying and the announcement of votes on 14th August, there was no legal basis for this. And it also did not appear to be a rational or proportionate decision based on the reasons given by the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission had said that there was sporadic violence in some polling stations, which they did not name, and decided based on those small outbreaks or alleged outbreaks to suspend the tallying and announcement of the votes on a nationwide basis. And as Sishiwa mentioned, this is completely unprecedented. It's never happened in our election history. And as Fides was mentioning, the 6 hours that the tallying had stopped, the center where the votes were being kept was being guarded by police and army officers. There were no independent monitors, observers, polling agents, or any other kind of official who had access to these ballot boxes. And the Electoral Commission has told us that some ballot boxes went missing. So it just calls into question whether or not the result, whatever it is, will be credible. The other thing I wanted to mention with regards, I think Fides sort of touched on it, but I think I want to go into greater detail. Something that has arisen in this particular election that we have never seen before. I think it's fair to say, even in unique times, at election time, certainly, where political party candidates have been abducted. And so specifically, the NRPUP, the leading opposition political candidate, Mr. Brian Mundubile, had his house raided on the 14th of August. The following day, he's gone missing. We do not know what his whereabouts are. His spokesperson for the NRPUP, Mr. George Chisanga, who also happens to be a former law association or bar association president, equally was picked up by armed, uniformed persons, and he went missing for some time. We've just found him last night, at a police station. He's being denied access to his family and lawyers. Also abducted was Bishop Trevor Mwamba, who is the president of the UNIP, which was the Independence political party, and he went missing, but has subsequently been found also at a police station, also being denied access to legal counsel and his family. People are trying to have these people released. And then also in the run-up to the election, several Tonse Alliance, which was the opposition alliance, members were rounded up and detained and have been detained indefinitely. They have not been brought to court. And from reports that I have received, certainly at least in one instance with regards to one opposition political party member, his lawyers have been attempting to get him released through the courts. And unfortunately, literally, the courts are dodging him. He can't get redress. And this, apparently, from reports I've received, is because judicial officers are being intimidated by security forces. So these are all very serious things that are happening in our country that are completely unprecedented. We have never, ever seen these things before. The other thing that isn't quite unprecedented, so in the 2021 general election, the Patriotic Front party decided to deploy the army on election day. But thankfully, in that instance, they did not interfere with the electoral process or the electoral outcome. That has been different in this instance. The army has been deployed despite civil society issuing statements to the effect that only the Zambia Police Service are constitutionally mandated to protect the internal security of any country. And so the deployment of the army is actually unconstitutional. As we speak, they have been manning polling stations. They're at the Totaling Center at Mulungushi Center, and they are being used to intimidate people, as Fides mentioned, from verifying information. Stakeholders at the Mulungushi are not being allowed to ask questions of the Electoral Commission freely and, without intimidation. These armed men coalesce around you when you start asking too many questions. So these are all things we've never seen in our country. Zambia is a peaceful country, and we've had our issues with elections, but never to this extent where we are in doubt as to whether the result will be credible. The other thing I wanted to mention is perhaps a call to action on behalf of civil society. We need voices to speak out on our behalf. We need bar associations, the international media, and other stakeholders who have influence on the international sphere to speak out about the things that are happening in our country. Zambia is a beacon of democracy on the continent, and we cannot allow democracy to fail here. We must ensure that we protect our democracy. I think I'll just stop here for now and see if there are any questions of any of the panelists. I can't see any hands.
Linda, I can also see there are 1 or 2 questions in the chat.
I can't see that. Where?
Yeah. I can try and read them for you, the ones I can
Yes,
see.
please.
Aaron Nkowane asked, are we saying that there are counting points where there were no polling agents or political parties involved in the election? Any specific examples? Then Chilufia Chileshe asked Fides, can you say more about the verification step that was allegedly skipped at the Presidential Totaling Center?
Are there any other
And
questions?
then, yeah, Aaron Nkowane asked again that some of the claims made here about ECZ must be counterbalanced with ECZ personnel. Although Brenda also asked Aaron to then say which claims in particular. Then I can see Andrea Capellan, my colleague Andrea Capellan asked, did you say that the main opposition candidate, Mundubile, himself has been abducted and his whereabouts are also unknown? So those are some of the questions as of now.
Thank you. Fides, would you like to go?
Yes, I'd like to go because I would want to go in. So if you remember, Linda, in the 2021 elections, whenever the results were transposed to the main totaling center for the presidential, so if there are any queries from the members of the stakeholders within the room, ECZ will retreat with the members, the stakeholders, and they'll do that verification, okay? Just to ensure, because one thing we should know is we all have monitors out there, okay? And then the monitors are sending in information. So if there's any discrepancy, for instance, there was a I think there was, is it yesterday or this morning, where one polling station was mentioned twice, was called twice. And so when you want to verify, you stop. I think in 2021, there was a courtesy where the ECZ would actually retreat with the stakeholders, verify that. If there are any issues, would verify, will all be satisfied, and then they would resume. We have not seen that this year. If there's any query and if the stakeholders want to question and if they want to like engage ECZ on some of the numbers based on the tallying at constituency level and what is big, if there's just any discrepancy they have shown, I think what we noticed is they are not giving an opportunity for stakeholders to really sit, speak and engage. And maybe even just retreat and say, you know what, maybe we can retreat, because that was practice in 2021. And we saw that also, is it in 2016? But in this tallying of that, we've seen that it is not happening. And I think there's that frustration from stakeholders to say, why are we here then if we can't engage and just agree to say we have this and you have that, and can we reach a common ground? Probably it's our discrepancy or it's your discrepancy, just to share notes. And I thought that practice that we had in 2021 worked very well as opposed to what is happening currently. And if you saw, I think, was it yesterday, where some of the I think from the alliance of the ruling party, somebody had to walk in with a pajama and came and he was instructing the ECZ to say they should not entertain stakeholders. It was in full view of everybody. There was the cameras there. What authority was that person acting on, coming to instruct ECZ not to entertain stakeholders who were invited by ECZ because they thought they had authority to do that? Someone who is in pajamas, and he was given the mic and he was shouting, and yet stakeholders in there who are in the room, been sleeping here at the totaling center, are not given that opportunity to do that. So it's just those, for me, the standards, why are we changing standards? So those are some of the things that probably we need to engage, and we are documenting. For us, we are documenting, and we are hoping that we could find an opportunity where we can engage and we'll be able to share the report widely when the report at the situation room, because we have a situation room where we are document all these irregularities we are seeing, but also the experiences and the practices happening currently. Thank you.
Thank you. Seshua, do you want to come in at this point?
Sure.